Hello, time for another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is A Leopard-Skinned Hat by Sere, translated from French by Mark Hutchinson. The original book in French was published in 2008. This English translation was published in 2024 by Lolly Editions. It's 112 pages. A Leopard-Skinned Hat was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize. There's a famous scene in the novel Alice in Wonderland where Alice says, "What good are books without pictures or conversations?" Well, this book doesn't have either. There's no illustrations and there's no dialogue. But it's still worth reading because it's a very beautifully written story, and B, it's a very powerful character study of a young woman who has severe mental illness and the lengths that her friend goes to try to help her. This book begins, it's a series of short chapters that are kind of assembled in a mosaic fashion. So you have to kind of piece together what's happening. The whole story's not linear, so you have to follow it as you go through. But essentially, there's two main characters. There's a man who calls himself the narrator, who's a writer in France, a French writer. And then his childhood friend is this woman named Fanny, who has died some years previously. And he's looking back years later on her death and trying to make sense of her life and what he could have done differently, if anything, to try to prevent her death. They meet as children. They become childhood friends because they have something in common that bonds them together, and that is they both have mothers who die when they were children. So they grow up without a mother, with a father, but without a mother. Fanny comes from a fairly well-to-do family. Her father lives in a very nice house and apparently has lots of money. They go their separate ways and then reconnect in their mid-20s and become friends again. But something has happened. When Fanny was a child, she was very happy. Despite the death of her mother, she was a cheerful child, very happy-go-lucky, easygoing. When the narrator meets Fanny again in their 20s, he realizes something seriously is wrong. Something's happened to her. And she's developed some serious mental illness during her teenage years. And it's not spelled out specifically what the illness is, but from reading the symptoms and her behavior as you go through the novel, it's pretty clear she had a form of bipolar disorder, a fairly severe one. There are some points where she gets bored easily, she drinks heavily, she spontaneously goes on ski trips or hiking trips because she wants excitement and stimulation. She has affairs, she has one-night stands, casual sex with people she doesn't know very well. She develops obsessions with certain things. She becomes obsessed with the American writer Carson McCullers and the German actress Romy Schneider, among other things. But then suddenly she'll become very withdrawn. She goes back to her apartment and just sits in the dark, or she goes back to her father's house and just stares out a window for days at a time. And her relationship with the narrator is sort of the same way. It's a platonic relationship. They never become lovers. He develops this feeling that he needs to do something to care for her, to help her. He becomes very nurturing, but he can never really connect with her for very long. She tends to alternate between either shutting down and keeping at arm's distance, a kind of aloof character, or she becomes extremely needy, unable to make any decisions on her own. He describes one scene where she's driving cross country and everything's fine. She seems completely capable of handling everything, but then they come to a crossroads and she just locks down because she can't make a decision on which road to take. Or there's another scene where they're in the same trip and there's a bunch of cattle in the road and she doesn't know what to do, and he has to step in and make decisions because she can't do that. So she alternates between being needy and being aloof, and there's only brief periods of time where they have something that might be considered a normal relationship. She sees psychiatrists, she takes medication, she does all kinds of things. The father and the narrator are trying to help her over this terrible illness, but nothing seems to work. And there'll be periods where she seems okay, and then she goes off the rails again. Now, after her death, there's a key moment that happens. One of the things about this book is it's very poetic in the fact that, like poems, poems don't are usually really good poems are usually kind of indirect. They don't specifically lay out what's happening. Some of the key scenes in this woman's life, Fanny's life, are mentioned in just a few sentences, and then the writer goes on to something else, and so you're kind of having to fill in the gaps. But one of the key moments is after her death. The narrator discovers that she's had a diary all these years. And he reads part of it and is absolutely stunned because he always thought of Fanny as having this chaotic life where she's haunted by these inner demons and nothing seems to help. But in her diary, it's completely the opposite. She seems this rational, coherent person. The writing is clear and everything is laid out linearly. So she had great self-discipline and self-control, and she seemed to be self-aware, aware of what was going on in her diary, but not in the rest of her life. And that leads him to wonder, and this is the philosophical part of the novel, in the later part of the novel, how well can we even know anybody? Wives, children, parents, friends, how well can we really know anyone? We think we know them. These two were friends for 20 years before her death, and he thought he knew her very well, but reading the diary makes him realize that there were parts of her that he didn't know at all. And so he says, basically, we're only seeing a small slice of a person when we interact with them. And we interact with a person through our own filter, our own personality, our own obsessions, and so forth. And so it may not really be possible for us to even know a person completely, even though we think we do. That's the philosophical part of it. And then at the very end of the book, Sere drops the whole pretense of the narrator character and talks to the reader directly. She even refers to the narrator as this character in the story. And then she imagines at the end Fanny ascending into heaven after her death and finally achieving peace and happiness that she wasn't able to have as an adult. So it's a rather dark story, very intense. It's a short book, only about 120 pages or 110 pages or so, but it's very intense and not terribly cheerful, right? Also, it's rather plotless, as you can hear from the description. It kind of jumps around in time. We're told at the very beginning of the book that Fanny has died, and she died at age 43. So when he writes about her death and what happened, how she died, at the end of the book, it's not a surprise. We already figured out what's the path is going to happen here. So there's not any real mystery here. There's not any suspense. We know what's going to happen. Instead, you're gradually piecing together this woman's life, and like the narrator trying to make sense of it, and what could have happened. Could anything have been done differently to prevent her death? Now, it turns out that Anne Sere's sister committed suicide some years before she wrote this novel. Again, the novel was written in 2008 and only recently translated. And some reviewers and commentators have suggested that this book was Sere's way of dealing with her grief over her sister's suicide. Instead of telling a nonfiction account, she creates this friendship between a man and a woman. But apparently there's some kind of similarities between the story of her sister's death and the character Fanny in this book. So it's a very thought-provoking book, short but very powerful, beautifully written, and very nicely translated by Mark Hutchinson. The book is A Leopard-Skin Hat. The author is Anne Sere, the translator Mark Hutchinson. This has been another Man and Gray book review. Thanks for watching.